first story behind mentioned walls. A miserly millionaire.
Can I have some more?
His briefcase was the same container that you would carry a case of beer in.
Spawns bad blood.
Dad said, I'm not sending any more money.
And later,
people get concerned, you know, Jersey's a very small place.
a billionaire's hideaway holds a birthday surprise.
Nicholas! Elizabeth! Is anybody there?
Had they been kidnapped? Had they been murdered?
I'm Christopher Mason. They say you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family. Some pay scant regard to family ties. Ruthless relatives who cash in the bonds of kinship and destroy their own flesh and blood.
In a dilapidated warehouse in Salt Lake City, an old man lies dead.
He'd been shot twice.
Shot with a .357 Magnum. His contents from his pockets were spread out. He didn't have a lot of cash on him.
Who would want to rob and kill this shabbily dressed man?
It was an area of Salt Lake where hobos and vagrants would often get on and off the train.
But looks can be deceiving.
Franklin Bradshaw was a millionaire.
He was certainly one of the wealthiest people in the West.
Salt Lake City, for its Mormon founders, the kingdom of God on earth. Like the rest of America, the kingdom thrives in the industrial boom after World War II. As families sprawl out to the suburbs, Utah businessman Franklin Bradshaw sees two surefire moneymakers: cars and fuel.
Franklin Bradshaw essentially started with nothing, except a very strong work ethic.
Franklin sets up a string of auto parts stores across Utah.
The real money, though, came from federal oil and gas leases.
He was one of the largest holders of oil leases in the United States. And from that, he amassed a fortune.
By the late 1950s, Franklin's business is booming. But you wouldn't know it.
Can we do a sandwich, Papa?
Thanks, sweetie.
He was very frugal and very ambitious.
Very eccentric, odd individual who worked all the time.
No mansion walls for this millionaire. Franklin and his glamorous wife, Berenice, bring up their kids in a modest home in suburban Salt Lake. His oldest daughter, Marilyn, remembers her father's only pleasure was work.
He would get up every morning and he'd be to work at 7 o'clock in the morning. And that was 7 days a week. All of his life that I know of.
His briefcase was the same container that you would carry a case of beer in. He put everything in it. He took to work every morning.
The eccentric auto parts king pours almost every penny he earns back into his business. Anything else is darn wasteful.
Can I have some more?
It's just strange that somebody would be worth that kind of money and not spend it.
Daughter Marilyn doesn't mind. She helps her father build his empire.
I worked with him. I spent summers working at the auto parts store. I got a feeling of how everybody respected him.
But some family members despair of their miserly life. Franklin's wife, Berenice, hankers for the finer things.
The marriage was not happy.
She was frustrated by the fact that she felt like Franklin had the money to spend on the family and wouldn't do it.
Nice. Look what he gave me.
Berenice's only consolation, her youngest daughter, Frances, the apple of her mama's eye.
She was our little baby sister, and everybody just loved her to death. She got mother's full attention and as much money as mother could get out of dad.
Like her mama, Frances is eager to escape their meager existence.
She wanted to have an Eastern lifestyle, ultimately wind up in New York City. She desperately wanted to get away from Salt Lake.
As a teenager, Frances Bradshaw finally gets her wish. She's sent off to an exclusive girls' school on the East Coast.
Mother sent her to New York with all new everything.
One bite of the Big Apple, and Frances is hooked.
She wanted to live on the Upper East Side of New York. In fact, that's the only place she ever lived, in New York.
2 decades and 2 husbands later, the Bradshaw heiress is now Frances Schroer, and she's firmly entrenched among New York's notables. Her mother, Berenice, often escapes Utah for a taste of her daughter's enviable life.
Bernice would make trips to New York because she, too, wanted a more glamorous life, had wanted that from the beginning.
Living it up with the ladies is Frances's closest friend,
Ladies, fine red wine.
Richard Dickey Barons.
They seemed to gravitate together. It was strictly a friendship, I'm sure, and they just liked to get together and talk about things and plan things that they never did.
One thing Frances never does is earn her own money.
Frances had no source except Mother. So anything that was done in Frances's name came from Mother.
And Mama's money comes, begrudgingly, from Daddy. By now, Franklin Bradshaw is in his 70s, but he still likes to keep his hands dirty with auto parts.
Here's a man worth millions of dollars, 76 years old, he's still working.
Frances might reject her father's work ethic, but her 2 sons, Mark and Larry, don't. The teenage boys spend their vacations in Utah, helping out at Grandpa's warehouse.
Our parents would invite the boys to Utah to spend the summers.
And so they came out and worked the entire summer down at the Bradshaw Auto Parts store.
In the summer of 1977, Franklin Bradshaw is struck down by a mystery virus. Luckily, the boys are on hand to nurse Grandpa back to good health.
He had a strong constitution. He did his push-ups every day. He drank all these kind of crazy things that now everybody thinks they're not crazy. Choline and inositol, and he was in fighting shape. It didn't kill him.
On a summer's day in 1978, Franklin Bradshaw has no grandsons to help out. It's Sunday morning. Franklin is the first one in. The auto parts store is still closed, but that won't stop this early morning caller.
Shot with a .357 Magnum.
Once in the back of the head and once in the back. His wallet was out, credit cards were strewn on the floor, his pockets had been pulled inside out, and the cash register was opened. So the police got there and they thought it was a robbery.
Detectives discover this isn't the first time someone has stolen from Franklin Bradshaw. The previous summer, valuable stocks and bonds went missing, $250,000 worth. Workers at the warehouse had suspected the summer helpers, Franklin's grandsons.
They didn't trust Mark and Larry for 1 second. And they really, would voice this. Frank did not want to believe them. He wanted to think the best of his grandsons.
So suspicion turns to Larry and Mark Schroer. If they had robbed their grandfather, could they have also killed him? Cops learn Larry has a history of violence.
He had a criminal record. He had been to prison for aggravated assault.
Larry had attacked a school friend with a hammer.
He basically tried to kill his roommate.
But there's no evidence against him. And his brother Mark was in New York with his mom Frances at the time of the murder.
There was nothing to tie either one of them to this murder.
Meanwhile, Franklin's wife Berenice seems to be relishing the role of merry widow.
she sort of had a ball after Dad died because she had all of his money.
Berenice moves into a brand new condo in the more elite streets of Salt Lake City and starts spending her newfound fortune. More money for Berenice means more money for favorite daughter Frances.
It was like suddenly a dam had opened and money was rushing through.
When she had hold of Mother's money, she just went crazy.
She moved herself into 10 Gracie Square, a very fancy apartment building in New York.
Frances even buys her way into the New York Ballet with a record $300,000 donation.
She was on the board of directors because of a large donation, but it was Mother's money.
With a chorus line of family members apparently dancing on Franklin's grave, investigators have their work cut out. With no firm leads, the case goes cold for 2 years.
Things stalled. Things stalled for quite a while.
There was no physical evidence, there was no testimony, there was nothing. And then we got a break on the case.
So I put it on the counter, and I said, I think this bag contains a gun, and I think it's a gun that killed my father.
Plenty of rich people I know are extremely cheap. That's one way of staying rich. Looks like Franklin Bradshaw has just been punished for his penny-pinching ways. And it seems everyone in his family has a motive to kill him. One of them even has the murder weapon.
2 years after Franklin is shot dead, his oldest daughter, Marilyn, has a special delivery for the NYPD.
I walked in and I said, who's in charge here? And the officer said, I am. So I put it on the counter and I said, I think this bag contains a gun. And I think it's a gun that killed my father. Everybody jumped up to look in the bag to see what it was. And sure enough, it was a gun.
They run a ballistics check, and lo and behold, we've got our murder weapon.
What was Franklin's daughter doing with this smoking gun?
Maybe it was Marilyn. Maybe Marilyn did want the money.
Marilyn tells the cops someone else gave her the gun. Her sister Frances's trusted friend, Dickie Behrens. Has he contacted Marilyn to clear his guilty conscience?
I started milking him for what information he had. So I was able to use his paranoia and talk him into giving me the gun, which I promptly took to the police station.
Dickie doesn't just hand over the murder weapon. He also tells Marilyn who killed Franklin. One of Francis Schroeder's sons. Marilyn figures it's the older son, Larry.
She thought it was Larry. She was convinced it was Larry.
But Marilyn is mistaken.
Dickie told me, oh no, you got the wrong son. It was the younger son who did it.
It was Mark.
He had admitted to Richard Behrens that he had flown to Salt Lake City and killed his grandfather.
With the murder weapon and Dickie's damning revelation, police have enough to arrest Mark Schroeder for murder in 1980. The teenager confesses to killing his grandfather 2 years earlier. He also admits stealing from Franklin.
The year before the murder, according to Mark, they stole over $250,000 from their grandfather out of the warehouse at the Bradshaw Auto Parts Company.
Mark wasn't just lining his pockets that summer. He was lacing Granddad's gruel.
He attempted to poison Franklin Bradshaw with rat poison. He was going to put it in his oatmeal.
Cramps.
So why would Mark Schroeder be targeting his grandfather?
Mark said that his mother had put him up to it. This was all done at her request and her instruction.
Get out!
Was Mark simply a pawn in a deadly family game? Frances certainly liked control.
She was not a very good mother. She had what we call a narcissistic personality. Everything had to be her way. There was no compromise.
This Manhattan mom was more interested in scaling the social ladder than playing parent.
Mark said that she would sometimes lock them out of the apartment, sometimes for days, and not let them come back.
One part of Mark's story doesn't add up. Why would Frances cut off the hand that feeds her?
How could she possibly have persuaded her son to do this? And the even larger question was, why?
Could Mark be framing his mother as revenge for her poor parenting? Police decide to arrest Frances Schroer,
Can we come in, please, ma'am?
raiding her apartment on the Upper East Side.
Excuse me, ma'am.
When they came in, Frances was on her way out the window. And they're not sure whether she was going to commit suicide or whether she was just trying to hide by climbing out the window, but they literally had to pull her back inside the apartment.
4 years after her father's slaying,
Ma'am, just calm down.
Frances is charged with first-degree murder. She pleads innocent, insisting her son Mark acted alone.
After she got charged, she put all of the blame just on Mark and said it was all his idea. He carried it out on his own.
Utah is poised for a sensational trial as mother and son go head-to-head. For Sister Marilyn, it seems surreal.
The reason I can talk about it, I was able to step back and watch it happen.
Someone not content to sit back and watch is Frances's faithful pal, Dickie Behrens. The man who held the murder weapon also holds the key to this case.
Now swirl.
Frances Schroer stands accused of her father Franklin Bradshaw's murder. The star witness is her trusted confidant, Dickie Behrens. He has already implicated her son, Mark. Now, Dickie is about to put his old pal Frances in the social pages for all the wrong reasons.
Frances owed Richard Behrens $3,500, and she would not pay him.
That's loose change for Frances. But that unpaid debt is enough to make Dickie spill the beans.
Frances had told him that she was behind it, and she was going to have her father killed because he was going to change the will and cut her out entirely.
Frances's all-consuming greed began as a teenager when she was thrown out of her fancy finishing school.
She was thrown out of Bryn Mawr, but she was forging checks, which was a pattern that continued in her life. Forging checks, she stole money from classmates.
They said that she wouldn't be considered for readmission unless she had some intensive psychiatric care.
The demanding daughter spent the next 2 decades feeding off her father's money.
He saw her as just basically an empty vessel when it came to money, not knowing how to manage money, not particularly wanting a job. And he saw her constantly just using what he felt was using Bernice, Frances' mother, his wife, to keep financing a lifestyle that he couldn't understand. He had no concept of why an apartment in New York City cost as much as it did. And so some of his agreement for a while, he sent money. And when he didn't want to send any money anymore, Bernice found a way to send the money.
She had a different lifestyle than he did, and he didn't approve of what she was doing or where she was living.
The court hears that just months before his murder, Franklin Bradshaw decided to end his daughter's Manhattan lifestyle.
Dad had said,
I'm not supporting you in New York anymore.
How do you expect me to live?
You can come back to Utah.
but I'm not supporting you in New York anymore.
I'm not coming back to Utah.
I don't care what you do, but I'm not sending you any more money.
Swamping New York high society for suburban Utah is too much to bear for Frances. She knows she'll have her mother's support if her father is out of the way.
The reason Dad was killed was because Frances knew that if Mother had Dad's money, Frances had it.
At first, Frances seeks professional help.
There was apparently a hitman that Frances had engaged the services of for $5,000 to kill Franklin Bradshaw.
He took the money, but he never came to Salt Lake to carry out the murder.
Burned on the murder deal, Frances looks closer to home. Her 17-year-old son, Mark.
He wanted to please his mother. He did not want to be out in the cold. Her basic thing to Mark was, you have to do this. Grandpa's old. He's got a lot of money. You need to do this so that your family can survive. You need to do this for us.
That's the right thing to do.
Her rationale was, it's not really killing, Mark. It's not really killing. It's the right thing to do for us.
Mark Schroer flies to Salt Lake City. He knows his grandfather will be the only one working early on a Sunday morning.
Mark.
He was waiting for his grandfather to turn around. The one thing he knew was that he could not shoot him face to face. One shot to the back, which sent him hurtling to the floor, face down. And then another shot at close range to his head. He needed and wanted to make sure he was dead because he didn't want to have to face his mother, Frances. And as he said, I didn't want to have to come back and do it again.
And then got on a plane and flew back home to New York.
Mark presents his mother with a memento.
She told her son what to do, and he followed orders. And I think he brought the gun back to prove to his mother that he's the one that had done it.
I did it.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm sure.
Boy, what's the right thing to do?
But Mark is mommy's boy no more. His testimony against her helps the murder charge stick.
He said, Mom has to be stopped. She has to be stopped.
In September 1983, 5 years after Franklin Bradshaw was gunned down, Frances Schroer is convicted of first-degree murder. She serves 13 years in prison.
Frances has never expressed any remorse in this case. At the time of sentencing, she continued to deny any involvement in the murder.
Mark Schroer is convicted of second-degree murder. He is sentenced to life, but only serves 12 years.
Well, we were not happy with the amount of time for this type of murder.
And what of the mom who stood by her conniving daughter every step of the way? Berenice Bradshaw dies in 1995, the same year Frances is released from prison.
Bernice J. Bradshaw was the key to this whole story, in my opinion. She was stronger than any other individual in the story. And if she hadn't been so weak in her dealings with her youngest daughter, had she been able to turn her back on her much, much earlier, she would have maintained a good relationship with her other two daughters. But in a way, she lost everything. She lost her whole family.
In her will, she leaves a parting gift for her daughter.
A year after Bernice died, she tried to give Frances $1 million. I don't think she ever got it because you can't benefit financially from killing someone.
Franklin Bradshaw spent his life ensuring his family wouldn't be spoiled by money. In the end, it destroyed them all.
What happened to this American family that on the surface seemed to have everything, and yet in the most important senses, they had nothing.
Ah, families. One minute they're all having a jolly sing-song around the piano. The next, someone's orchestrating a murderous vendetta. And when you add serious money to the mix, things can go decidedly off-key, as one family finds out when their world comes crashing down.
After a furious hurricane, a millionaire's bungalow is still standing. But a friend senses something's not right.
It was very, very strange. The post had accumulated. The house was unlocked. The cars were there.
The house is like a sauna.
The heating was on very, very high.
Owners Nicholas and Elizabeth Newell have been out of contact for days.
Nicholas! Elizabeth! Is anybody there?
It's as if nature herself has swallowed the wealthy couple.
Elizabeth and Nicholas Newell just disappeared from the face of the earth. They were never seen again.
The tiny windswept island of Jersey, a remote British hideaway in the English Channel, straddling two cultures.
It's a kind of mixture of England and France. It's got beautiful rolling green fields, tiny little alleyways.
Jersey's best known for its brown cows, its beaches, and its billion-dollar bank accounts.
It's a tax haven.
Got a few $1 million to hide? Forget the Cayman Islands or the Bahamas. Jersey's the #1 offshore tax shelter on the planet. Roughly $5 billion per square mile is invested here. A treasure island for cashed-up British folk, like Nicholas and Elizabeth Newell.
They were from well-to-do, historic, moneyed Scottish industrial families, and they were both heirs to quite substantial sums of money. And they had a rather good life.
The affluent couple both studied at a prestigious British university.
St Andrews University is a very beautiful, historic academic institution where, later on, Kate Middleton would meet and fall in love with Prince William. And that's where Elizabeth and Nicholas met.
They trained to become school teachers, but their privileged background meant Nicholas and Elizabeth could quit teaching the 3 R's to sail the 7 seas.
They had a dream, and their dream was to go on a beautiful trip to the West Indies on their boat and take the little boys with them.
Nicholas Newell's family made their fortune making nuts and bolts for the shipping industry. With the sea in his blood and an inheritance to protect, Nicholas happily sets up home in this millionaire's tax haven in 1967, with his wife Elizabeth and their young sons Mark and Rodrik. And home is no beach shack.
Crow's Nest is a beautiful house overlooking the Atlantic. It's really magnificent. I'm sure the property now is worth a fortune. They fell in love with Jersey, like a lot of people did, and they decided that the boys would grow up there.
And grow up they did. 20 years later, the Newell boys have left their island home behind. Mark becomes a high-flying bonds dealer in Paris, while older son Rodrik's a military man, an officer in one of Britain's most prestigious regiments. In October 1987, the two sons make a surprise trip home for their mother's 48th birthday. They take Nicholas and Elizabeth to one of Jersey's finest restaurants, where they dine on lobster and lavish desserts. The champagne flows freely at the sumptuous dinner.
to be all back in the one place again.
But this will be the family's last supper together.
And after that meal, Elizabeth and Nicholas Newell just disappeared from the face of the earth. They were never seen again.
Storm clouds are gathering over the tiny tax haven of Jersey. On October 15th, 1987, days after Elizabeth Newell's elaborate birthday bash, Jersey is hit by a hurricane. The island's grand mansions aren't the only casualties. Elizabeth and Nicholas Newell also seem to have gone with the wind.
The great storm disrupted everything. Trees were down, lines were down, communications were very, very bad.
As Jersey's wealthy elite survey the damage and start calling their insurance brokers, the Newells are missing in action.
They had missed appointments for the doctor, for the optician.
People get concerned, you know, Jersey's a very small place.
Many assume the hurricane took their wealthy friends.
Nicholas! Elizabeth! Is anybody there?
There were people who thought that they would have gone walking on the cliffs and been swept off during the storm.
Jersey's rugged hills are riddled with abandoned World War II bunkers.
And every now and then people would go into them and get stuck, so they thought maybe they had gone missing in one of those.
A meticulous search turns up nothing. But Jersey police do find a fascinating plot in the Newells' finances. In the past year, their assets have also started to disappear.
I think it's fair to say that they had run into financial difficulty with their investments.
A year earlier, Nicholas and Elizabeth sold off the family mansion to close friends.
To freedom?
To freedom.
The couple moved into a modest bungalow.
If you make the contrast between the two properties of this stunning residence at Greve de Lec and the rather run-down, grim house, is really quite staggering, the contrast.
Why the humiliating downgrade? It seems a series of bad investments meant the Newells' wealth was draining away. Could this have anything to do with their disappearance? Perhaps the couple simply boarded their yacht and sailed away to a new life.
They've either done a runner or it's a financial issue.
They thought maybe they had faked their own disappearance. In mysteries, people have disappeared sometimes for an insurance claim.
Could it be an insurance scam? Sons Rodrik and Mark can offer no clues. They'd flown back to London the day after Elizabeth's birthday dinner. And now, as the mystery deepens, the boys return to Jersey to defend their parents' name.
There's absolutely no reason whatsoever for my parents to go without leaving word.
After a series of dead ends, everyone on this Jersey shore is left wondering, did nature really take the Newells? Were they even dead? Local police want answers, so they call in forensic investigators from Scotland Yard. And as they comb the storm-damaged bungalow, they find the first clue.
All around the fireplace, there were tiny, tiny, dark brown stains and marks.
After they'd ripped up the carpets and found that there was still blood underneath the carpets, then that was the scene, and the thing was treated entirely differently after that.
Bloodstains, and not just around the fireplace.
They were all over the shop, all over the house. Blood had seeped in between the parquet flooring and into the underlay of the house.
Blood in the living room matches Nicholas Newell's. In the bedroom, a positive match for Elizabeth. Something terrible has transpired.
A sustained episode of violence had taken place in the house. And that was when the nature of the case transferred from being a missing persons case into a double murder.
A Jersey court declares Nicholas and Elizabeth Newell officially dead. Their two grieving sons inherit what's left of their fortune. Cautious Mark, with his business acumen, invests his inheritance. And Rodrik, he buys a yacht to sail around the world, intent on washing away his tragic loss.
He said, look, I'm just going to have a fresh break, a new beginning. I'm going to turn the page with all of this and start a new life.
As the boys console themselves with what's left of the family fortune, investigators ramp up their search. And it pays off in dense woodland near the Newells' former mansion.
Suddenly we're looking around and there's the remnants of a fire.
In the ashes of a bonfire, more intriguing clues.
Spectacles that had been prescribed to Nicholas.
Nicholas Newell's glasses and Elizabeth Newell's handbag. Police dig up the site, expecting to find human remains. They find nothing. Without bodies, the case drags on for 5 years. But over time, more family secrets bubble to the surface.
I think the parents were, like a lot of British people, a little bit cold and remote.
There wasn't a lot of love shown there.
It seems Mark and Rodrik Newell had a rocky relationship with their parents. Mark's childhood friend Nick Simon says the Newell boys were banished to boarding school at a young age.
I think from the age of 8, quite sort of harsh upbringing, you know. So 8 years old is quite young to go to school by yourself.
When they weren't away at boarding school, the boys spent holidays at their uncle's home in Scotland.
For weeks at a time in the summer, whilst the parents, who were consumed with their own lives, got on with enjoying themselves in Jersey.
The children were not a nuisance exactly, but they weren't completely included into the embrace of the family.
Did the boys have a vendetta against their parents? They were the last people to see them alive. One person who doesn't trust them is Nicholas Newell's brother, Stephen.
Uncle Stephen, Nicholas's identical twin brother, always suspected the boys. Suspicions are not enough. He needed hard evidence.
Stephen is approached by police with a plan. He arranges a rendezvous with Rodrik Newell at a Scottish hotel, with cops recording every word.
My brief to Stephen had been, don't, under any circumstances, lead him down the path because this will end up inadmissible. Let him do the talking.
And Rodrik has plenty to talk about. In a cozy hotel in Scotland, 5 years after his parents' murder, Rodrik Newell peers into the face of his dead father.
Uncle Stephen, Nicholas's identical twin brother.
Rodrik has something to get off his chest.
I killed them.
This most compelling confession to double murder. He knows exactly where his parents are buried.
You don't talk about bodies being found easily unless you know where they are.
Rodrik has no idea his uncle is wired, and police are standing by to arrest him. After pouring his heart out, he quickly wraps it up.
Rodrik composes himself and then takes his leave after admitting, it would appear, to killing his parents.
After the meeting, Rodrik uses his military training to disappear.
I don't know how it happened, but Rodrik, a bright lad, he gave the police the slip, and he sped off into the night.
Rodrik takes flight on the high seas, sailing his yacht into international waters. Jersey police launch a worldwide manhunt.
Interpol, GCHQ, the spy headquarters, the FBI, everybody's looking for Rodrik.
With Rodrik on the run, cops contact his brother Mark in Paris, but he's keeping tight-lipped.
Mark, meanwhile, had not said a word to anybody.
A few weeks later, Rodrik's yacht is spotted off Gibraltar, a British outpost in the Mediterranean Sea. Police use the Royal Navy to set a trap, waving him down for a routine customs check.
He then got into a little rowing boat. He climbed up to get onto the ship itself. On the way up, a member of the Royal Gibraltar Police said to him, "Boy, have we got a surprise for you."
After years of intrigue, Jersey's most famous murder case is about to be solved. Rodrik Newell is charged with double murder. When he arrives back on Jersey, Rodrik tells all, revealing a sorry tale of greed played out the night of Elizabeth Newell's birthday dinner.
After the meal, they went back to the house. There was some more drinking apparently that went on, although apparently that night Mark didn't join in the drinking.
Mark returns to his apartment on the island, leaving Rodrik alone with his parents, a decision that might have cost them their lives.
Rodrik says that an argument developed during the meal, and then the argument continued afterwards at the family home.
Rodrik is furious that Nicholas and Elizabeth have sold the family mansion.
And now you're squandering our inheritance.
I am your father, and you will show me some respect.
I have no respect for you.
Rodrik flipped. He had a history of flipping. He was a hothead. He was a bit of a wild boy. He had a temper.
He's also trained in martial arts and grabs a set of Japanese rice flails, or nunchucks.
In the army, Rodrik learnt every aspect about what it entails to be an officer, which of course involves training how to kill people. But it was certainly a very violent death. There were lots of blood all over the shop, unfortunately.
After attacking his parents, Rodrik says he passed out. He's been drinking heavily. Only when he wakes does he realize what he's done.
Rodrik can't even remember the details, but something went down. 2 people were dead.
He calls the only person left to turn to, his younger brother, Mark.
Hello? I killed him. What do you mean? I remember hitting him, but I don't remember hitting her.
Are you sure that they're dead?
Yes, I'm sure!
He had to weigh up in 1 second the loyalty to his parents and the loyalty to his brother.
Calm down.
I'll have to kill myself.
No! I'm coming over now. Don't do anything.
Mark doesn't call the police. He helps with the cover-up.
They were tied and wrapped in plastic sheeting. They were transported in a van, which they hired, and they were still in the clothes from the dinner party.
The boys take their mother and father to where it all began, near their childhood home of Crow's Nest.
And there, they buried their parents and threw them into these graves, covered up, and off they went. And that's where they languished for some 5 years or so.
The brothers then return to the bungalow to scrub the crime scene.
A major attempted cleanup took place at the house.
Come on, leave it. It's good enough. Let's go. Leave it.
The heating must have been turned on to dry out not just the carpet, but the bed linen, which had been washed, but in a very kind of young mannish guy sort of way. It hadn't been properly done.
They also turn up the heat by building a bonfire to burn the remaining evidence. The boys leave the island, and days later, the great storm helps cover their tracks.
The scene where they were buried could well have been visited much sooner by people who walked that area had it not been for the storm. Those bodies were well buried. Only an army officer, I reckon, could have done that in the middle of the night.
After Rodrik's detailed confession to the cops, his brother Mark finally admits he helped dispose of his parents' bodies. Rodrik directs detectives to the burial site, where the bodies of Nicholas and Elizabeth Newell are recovered. In August 1994, Rodrik Newell pleads guilty to double murder and receives 2 life sentences. Mark pleads guilty to being an accessory to murder twice and receives 2 concurrent 6-year terms. But good breeding and good behavior pay dividends, even in prison. After just 20 months in Her Majesty's custody, Mark Newell is released. His brother, the killer, he's a model prisoner and is set free 12 years into his life sentence.
And so they're out and leading their lives, maybe under new identities, anonymously. But who can put that sort of event just behind you?
Family can bring us together, but it can also tear us apart. Frances Schroer sacrificed her father and son to fund her lavish life. Rodrik Newell's greed sparked a storm of terror. Both favored fortune over family, but in the end, they too were betrayed by their own flesh and blood. Till next time we meet behind mansion walls, I'm Christopher Mason.